Welcome, coaches, and that was a good lead up from Jeff in terms of the presentation for tonight, because our responsibility as coaches is to reflect back. This is one of our responsibilities, to reflect back and think we have these actions in our head that we want our team first to make and individual players second to make. And do we, during those practices that we have, do we create clear references for the players so that what is in our brain as coaches, they begin to carry out on the field as players? And there is it's a slippery slope as I say that, because the interpretation by some coaches will be, well, I just want players to be robots and do what I tell them. That's not what we're looking for. We don't want players to be robots. We want to download references into their brain. Their responsibility then as players is to recognize the best patterns given the situations that they encounter on the field, because the players are responsible ultimately for the actions and the decisions on the field. So as we move through tonight, there will be times where things pop up in your brain, whether it's a word that triggers this thought, whether it's a picture that triggers this thought, and you want to be aware as you're going through the night, jot those pop-ups down. If you want, if they're in the form of questions, to put them in the chat box, that will be great. And we'll get to those at the most appropriate time. Or they may just be some reflections that you have, some pop-ups from your unconscious brain, where it may connect a dot from something you did in the past to maybe something you want to do in the future, or to something that you want to avoid doing in the future. And so make sure you're aware of those pop-ups or those reflections, because thinking about those reflections is now how you become a better coach and improve yourself, and obviously thus improve your players. So as we go into tonight, the overall question that should be in the forefront of all of our heads is, what is the theoretical purpose, or just the purpose in general, of any training session? What is the reason we bring players together on that field on a Tuesday or Thursday, a Monday or Wednesday, or if you have the luxury of more frequent training sessions than that, what is the overall purpose that you bring them together? In keeping that question in our head, before we get into a bit more of the practical pieces of it, just to kind of set the table with some objective references as we move forward into a training session. So the first one, understanding the characteristics of the game we coach. The game we coach is the same game all over the world. The game has characteristics. Those characteristics are played out in Italy. They're played out in India. They're throughout the United States, because we are all playing the same game. What those characteristics of the game we coach are, first and foremost, communication happens on the field. That communication happens from a verbal standpoint, talking, and a nonverbal standpoint. As a coach, and I'm sure you've observed this, you have a ball, it gets played into a midfielder on your team. The defender who passes the ball into the midfielder yells to the midfielder, verbally turn, verbally man on. So they are communicating at a verbal level. The majority of the communication that happens on the field is nonverbal. It's taken in through the eyes of the player, and that nonverbal communication is constant. It's much more frequent and much more often than the verbal side of it. For example, a ball rolls into your goalkeeper, your two center backs start moving away from each other, and they're communicating to the goalkeeper, well, I'm creating more space between you and me, and I'm available for you to throw the ball into me. If a ball rolls into a wide back or a center back, you may see the midfielder begin making a run toward the center back, communicating to that center back, I want the ball, I'm available for the ball. Defenders, opponents, they communicate non-verbally also. The ball rolls into a midfielder, and who starts closing them down? The defender. The defender communicates, you better make a decision or risk losing possession of the ball. So that communication happens constantly. As coaches, our job is to enhance or improve the communication, mostly nonverbal communication of the team we coach. And how do we do that? We do that through tactics. Tactical agreements that we as a coach download into our players' brains so that they become more predictable to one another. Those tactical agreements are as if-then statements. If I do this, you do that. If you do this, I do that. And through those tactical agreements, we as a team become more predictable to each other. And what does that lead to? Coaches always use this phrase, speed of play. Speed of play happens at a team level first. And through those tactical agreements, we are, as a team, able to improve or increase the speed at which we play. Once players collect information, and that's what players are, collectors of information, once they collect that information, they make a decision. The decision is made through their game insight. Players are responsible for their own individual game insight. That insight then, because they've collected information, and the more information they collect, they then are able to execute the decision that they've made. And how do they do that? They do that through technique. So as you can see, technique is important. Being able to pass, receive, head the ball, chip the ball. All these things are techniques that are important. But the technique is at the third level, not at the first level. Players only execute the decision through their technique after they've communicated and after they've made the decision. These things happen quickly, but at the third level, technique is important. Below that black dotted line, you can see fitness. Fitness is performing the player actions, a soccer action, communicate, decide, execute, performing that soccer action as frequently as possible and for as long as possible. That's fitness. A fit soccer player is able to perform that action of 3, communicate, decide, execute, and then do that block of 3 again, and then do that block of 3 again, and then do that block of 3 again. Performing soccer actions is fitness. Fitness is not running around a field. Fitness is not doing shuttles. It's not running around flagpoles or jumping over hurdles. Fitness is communicating, deciding, and executing as frequently as possible and for as long as possible. So continuing with this characteristics of soccer, and these characteristics are universal, meaning Messi communicates, decides, and executes no different than the players you coach communicate, decide, and execute. What is the big difference, obviously, between Messi and the players we coach? I'm assuming here, because my hope is none of you coach Messi, but what is the big difference? Messi does this unit of 3. He performs those soccer actions in less time and in less space. But we all perform those soccer actions. The communication is at team level. That's the first thing that happens, at team level, because the sport we coach is a team sport. The coach is responsible for the tactics. Those tactics are non-negotiable from the coach to the players. The player's responsibility, because again, we don't want robots, the player's responsibility is to decide and execute. The coach provides the tactical agreements. The players perform the decisions and execute those decisions. The communication or the tactics is what players do. That is from the coach. The player's responsibility is how it's done. For example, if the coach wants the opposite side wing forward to come into the middle when the ball is on the other side of the field, when this team is defending, that's what they will do. It's non-negotiable by that wide player or wing forward to come in. That wing forward must come in. That's what he or she will do. How the wing forward comes in, that's the player's responsibility. Maybe the wing forward comes in diagonally forward. Maybe he or she comes in diagonally backward toward his or her own goal. Or maybe the wing forward just sprints across the field horizontally. What determines the answer to how he comes in or how she comes in? All the external factors happening on the field around that player. All the information that player collects tells that player, provides that player a pattern to recognize in terms of how he or she will come in. The act of coming in, that must happen. That is provided by the coach.
And Mike, maybe I can ask you a quick question. So when it comes to style of play, where would that fit in on that scale, or on those three objectives that you have there: decision-making or communication, decision-making, execution?
You mean the playing style?
Yes.
The playing style would come in at team level, because that's how the team is going to perform, or how the team would attack, how the team would defend. And let me be a bit more specific. So every coach obviously coaches players, and every coach coaches players that are unique to that coach. No coach coaches the same players, and each of us coach different players, different ages, different abilities. So taking into account what the ability level and the qualities our players possess, you decide on, as a coach, a formation, what the team is going to do in attack, what the team is going to do in defense. So some coaches may say, I want to high press the opposition as close to the opponent's goal as possible. No problem. Other coaches, after they look at and reflect on the players they coach, they may say, we're going to drop a little bit deeper, maybe to the half line, maybe to the top of the circle, and we will delay our press and defend there. Some coaches may say, we're going to press the opponent horizontally and try and trap the ball on the sideline. Other coaches may say, we're going to press vertically and try and win the ball at the opponent's center back or center midfielders. So style comes in. It's the responsibility of the coach in terms of what the team is going to do. Playing style at team level.
Okay, thank you.
So another reference to kind of download into our brains as coaches is the question, passing or kicking. As we think about what we've done, maybe last 2 months ago, I guess it's been about 2 months since we've all been on the fields training our players. Last year, last couple years, or through our entire coaching career, this is one thing you see frequently. Some players will have the ball and they may be in a circle, a diamond as they appear here, and blue triangle number 8 passes to blue triangle number 4. And then number 8 follows their pass. And then 4 plays to 6 and follows their pass. And 6 plays to 5 and follows, and 5 plays to 8 and follows. And then it all continues to go in that order and in that shape. And so you see these types of exercises on the field as you go out to where your club complex is or where you train. If there are other teams out there, this is something that you see frequently. It could, again, be with 5 players. It could be with more than 5. It could be with a full team of 11 players out there. But you see these types of patterns frequently. At the other end of the spectrum, you could see something like this. And maybe you even see this on a full half a pitch. 10 versus 1. The red circles have the ball and they keep it away from the blue triangle number 6. 10 versus 1. So you have these two opposing activities. And now the question becomes, as coaches, what do you see most often? Do you see the 5 versus 0 most often? Or do you see, as you go out to a complex and you see multiple teams training on multiple fields, do you see the 10 versus 1 most often? And if your observations are similar to my observations, you see the 5 versus 0. Some of these could be warm-ups. Some of them could be in the heart of a training session. But the most frequent thing you would see, or you would see it more often than not, is 5 versus 0 rather than 10 versus 1. And the reason you wouldn't see 10 versus 1 more often is because many coaches would have the thought in their head, boy, that would be really easy. It would be really easy if you did it on half of a field like that, regardless of age. Under 8, under 18, no way would I play 10 versus 1 anywhere near a size field like that, because it would be way too easy. So the question at a theoretical level is the top half picture 10 versus 1 kicking or passing? Is the bottom half of the picture kicking or passing? And if we go back to the original question of thinking, why would I not do 10 versus 1 because it's too easy? The interesting question becomes, if 10 versus 1 is way too easy for my players, why would we do 5 versus 0 and take that one lone defender out? And thinking about, again, that theoretical question, what is kicking, what is passing? We said a soccer action has 3 parts: communication, decision, and the execution of a decision. 10 versus 1, yes, it's very easy. Even for an under 10 team on that size of an area, playing 10 versus 1. But what those 10 red circles are doing is performing soccer actions. The action of passing. The ball is at red number 4. Red number 4 communicates with his or her teammates, with the defender, because the defender communicates as well, as we said, where to pass the ball and where not to pass the ball. And then red number 4 executes that decision of where to pass it. At 5 versus 0, there is no communication. The communication comes from the coach in terms of pass to blue number 4. Blue number 8 doesn't decide, well, should I pass to 4 or should I pass to 5? Blue number 8 is told one thing, and blue number 8 has to do that one thing. There is no decision made by blue number 8, because the decision, again, is made by the coach. The only thing you are working on within 5 versus 0 or 8 versus 0 or 11 versus 0 is the execution. The reason the bottom becomes kicking is because if you take a soccer action and its 3 components and you take these 2 components out of the soccer action, it's no longer a soccer action anymore. It's a general action, and that general action is kicking. If you want your players to perform soccer actions, passing, tackling, intercepting, receiving, then there has to be those 3 components. Theoretically, there has to be those 3 components: communication, decision, and execution. So 10 versus 1 is extreme. It's an exaggeration for sure, but it's passing. 5 versus 0, those players are not performing passing. It looks like passing, but without the communication and without the decision, those players are just kicking the ball. So what you as a coach want to do is simplify, not go out there and do 10 versus 1, because as most of you are thinking, it would be way too easy. So you think of simplifications of 11 versus 11. Do not take the slide literally as though it's communicating to you or saying to you, only play 7v7, only play 4v4. It's just a graph. It's just to show you simplifications of 11 versus 11 is what you want to do, because you have in your head actions that you want your team to make. And if those players can make those actions in practice, there is a higher likelihood that they will also make those actions in the game on Saturday or Sunday. So we've discussed the characteristics of soccer: communication, decision, execution. We've discussed the thinking mistake that some coaches make, passing or kicking. The last one is you want players. All coaches want players to become expert pattern recognizers. The hope The hope is that those patterns that they are recognizing in practice are identical or as identical as possible to the patterns that they will encounter in games. Because your brain, you have your unconscious brain. Your unconscious brain is responsible for the majority of the things you accomplish throughout every day. Your conscious brain is not the one who runs the show. 90% or more of your day is ruled by your unconscious brain. As you just think over a 10-second period of all the things that you have done throughout the day that you aren't even aware of, or that you do on the automatic pilot. So what happens throughout your day is your unconscious, even to a degree, it recognizes patterns that you don't even consciously recognize. It collects information that you aren't even consciously aware of. So your unconscious brain is stimulated by your surroundings, and then the majority of us just have a response. We don't even consciously think about it. When those patterns are slightly different, then it triggers a conscious thought from our unconscious brain because the pattern is a little different. For example, and I'm sure you've experienced this because most coaches do, you've just delivered a training session, you're now driving home, it's later at night, and what do you begin reflecting on? The training session. In the meantime, you're making left turns, you're making right turns, you're merging on the highway, you're getting off on the off-ramp of the highway, and before you know it, you're pulling into your driveway. And then for a second, you do have a conscious thought, I don't remember driving home. I don't remember making that merge onto the highway. I don't remember the last stoplight before I pulled into my neighborhood or my subdivision. And so while you're reflecting on the session, what is your unconscious brain doing? It's filling in the gaps because it recognizes all those patterns because you've probably driven that way home hundreds of times. What does happen as you're driving on a side street or in your subdivision, all of a sudden a deer or a possum or a ball or a little child starts coming into the street. And what happens? It jogs your conscious. Your unconscious doesn't recognize the pattern as happening all the time. And so it's almost as if there is an alert or a pop-up in your conscious brain. And some of you may have even said this out loud. Oh, I need to pay attention a little bit more. You were paying attention. It's just your unconscious brain was running the show. So we as human beings are constant stimulus response people. Situations occur, stimulus response beings. So knowing that we as people are like that, how can we influence the players that we coach? Because the players are human beings also. Without these references that we will talk about shortly, without these references in our brain, what is providing the situation or the stimulus for people to respond to? Coaches and players. They respond, or they are providing a response to a referee, a teammate, an opponent, the climate, the field conditions. Let me give you an example. A forward has the ball. He is dribbling in on goal. He ends up losing the ball to the central defender. And what does the forward do? He blames or he yells to a teammate, you should have gotten open faster. Because he is stimulated, or the situation provides itself and his response is to the teammate right away, what does the forward stop doing? Performing soccer actions. The action of transitioning to defense. From a coaching standpoint, the ball is in play. The referee makes a bad decision, which happens, we know. The coach then, the situation of referee making the bad decision, stimulates the coach. And what does the coach do? He begins yelling at the referee. The coach sees the situation and immediately stimulus response pattern, he begins yelling at the referee. What the coach stops doing, because that reference isn't in his head, keep looking at my players and see if they're transitioning to defense as a team, clear enough in his head. He is wasting time by yelling at the referee, and he's losing valuable time of observing his own players. So these stimulus response patterns happen constantly. How do we avoid these external factors, referee, teammates, opponents, influencing us? We increase the conscious firepower of our conscious brain. And we do that by having more and more objective, true references in our unconscious brain. 3 examples of those references are what we're talking about tonight. So knowing that we are stimulus response people or human beings, what you as the coach want to do is take these tactical references, where the team sets their defense up, what each player does when the ball is at the opponent right back, what each player does when the opponent has the ball at one of the center backs, what each player on your team does when they're defending and the ball is at the opposition left back. You have all these tactical references in your brain, and you want to download them into the brain of your players. Because we said the more predictable they can become to each other, the faster the decisions can be made, and the quicker the execution of those decisions can be made. So again, we go back to what is the theoretical purpose of our training sessions? And at the end of the day, the theoretical purpose is to improve soccer actions. First, those actions occur at team level. Second, those actions occur at individual level. So as we have this, and this is just, do not take this slide literally, just take it for the purposes of this presentation. If we as a team, or you as a coach, decide you are coaching the blue triangles, and this is how you're going to press the opponent at team level. So the team function is defending, the team task, disturbing the buildup, the tactical principle, you're going to press the opponent horizontally. There are other ways you can press the opponent. As we said earlier, you could have chosen to press vertically, but that is all dependent on each coach's decision, and there is no wrong decision in terms of the way in which your team is going to press. You can have your team press in any way you want. For purposes of the presentation tonight, this is what we picked because at the end of the day, we had to pick something. So we're going to disturb the buildup horizontally. We want to get the opponent to play to the center back and then the fullback, and we are going to horizontally move across the field and try and trap the ball on the sideline of the field. This coaching reference is in our head, and now we need to download these references, these black lines, into the players' brains, because this is what they will do. It's non-negotiable. Blue number 7 will come in. Blue number 2 will move across. Blue number 9 will move in a similar way as those black arrows. That's non-negotiable. What you see a typical training session with coaches is games like this. They will have an intention of improving their team in terms of disturbing the buildup, defense, pressing, and they will do games like this. There is not necessarily a wrong way to play these games. But as you look at these games being played, you must ask yourself the question as a coach, what is the purpose of this training session? What is the reason I'm doing these games? And how do these games connect the dots to what actions I want them to make on the field on Saturday? And so the way in which this keep away game is executed by the coach brings his team together. The coach looks at his players and goes 1, 2, 3, 4 red, 1, 2, 3, 4 blue, and takes those 8 players or 6 players and puts them out there in that square or rectangle, and they play. The same thing will happen with 4 versus 2 plus 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 red, 1-2 blue, go and play, and so on with the 6v3 plus 3. The problem is, as we begin to think about the field and the formations we have, again, ask yourself the question, how do these games provide exact or as identical as possible references to players so that they're making these actions on the field? Within the formation we have, within any formation you as a coach have, it could be this formation, it could be 4-4-2, it could be 4-4-2 with a diamond midfield rather than a flat midfield, it could be 3-5-2, it could be 3-4-3. All formations can make one of two shapes, either diamonds or triangles, and we know two triangles make a diamond. Within this formation, you have a diamond between those four players. You have a diamond between those four players. You have a diamond between those four players. Between those four players, between those four, and between those. So you have diamonds all over this field. And now when you create, and again, go back to these training examples, the question that you ask is, depending on who B1 and B2 are in the keep away game, are they players that are going to interact and communicate more often on the field? Because B1 may be your striker, but B2 may be a defender. B1 could be your left midfielder and B2 your right midfielder. R4 could be a right winger and R3 a left back. When you just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, are you as a coach picking those players in order to improve that communication? And remember, the majority of the communication that happens on the field is nonverbal. Are you picking those players to influence them unconsciously as much as possible and enhance that nonverbal communication as much as possible? Because as we said, when you're looking at these exercises during a training session, if you choose to do 4 versus 2, there's the formation we have. And again, we are the blue triangles. The question that you ask is, what players communicate when we are disturbing the buildup, when we are pressing the other team horizontally? What players are going to communicate most frequently or more frequently than others? And as you ask yourself that question, it becomes clearer that the winger and the attacking midfielder on that side will communicate more frequently. Other players will communicate, but when the ball goes as it's shown in that slide, 11 and 8 will communicate, potentially verbally, and for sure, non-verbally, more frequently or more often than the other players will. So looking at that, when you pick your 4v2, instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4 red, 1, 2 blue, can you be more thoughtful in terms of who those players are? Because when you play your 4v2 game, and again, you may not have a full field. So again, don't take this picture or this slide literally. Think about the processes that we're talking about. You may not have a full field to be able to play it in that area of the field. It's not even going to be the size of the dimensions. We didn't worry about the size of the field or the size of the area. That's a whole nother conversation. And to try and stay on the same wavelength tonight, we didn't worry about dimension size or field size. But think about, again, think about the concept or the theory behind it. When you pick that 4v2, what happens with many coaches is it's in that yellow rectangle, the red team has it, the blue team win it, and now the blue change with one of the red. Well, your 11, number blue 11, may end up functioning as a center back or a left back or a sided player or what would be like a center midfielder, when they will never function in those areas of the field or in that position in a game. So having them set up in the way that they are unconsciously influences, because everything we do as coaches unconsciously influences their behavior to do something. And the way this game is set up, once the blue players win it, they have a direction or a goal they're trying to score at. Once the red team break the pressure or beat blue 11 and blue 8, they have a goal they're trying to score at, because the game is directional. So again, being more thoughtful, how could you begin to manipulate? Because again, even the position of the goals has an unconscious influence on the behavior of the blue team. Why would a goal be set up here at the corner? Because as you reflect and think back, who would, if the blue team win it, who would be a player that they would want to find once possession is won? And that player would be the striker. So if you set it up like this, you are now unconsciously influencing them to, once you win the ball, look for the forward or look forward for someone to pass to. That's why the goal is there. So that the blue team has a goal to score at, the red team has a goal to score at, because without these goals, once the ball gets to red number 8, what would red number 8 do? Just pass back to red number 4. Well, in a game, if you do this in practice hundreds and hundreds of times, then in the game, when red number 4 passes into red number 8 and red number 8 passes back, you as the coach begin to pull your hair out and ask yourself, why didn't he go forward? Why didn't he turn? There was no one there. Well, he never did it, because the hundreds of times he did it in practice, he never did it there either. And so all those things are unconsciously influencing what your players will do. Another way, if you have a goalkeeper, all right, or even zooming out further, what would it look like in a real game? Blue number 11, blue number 8 win possession. They pass it into blue number 9, then would go on goal. You could recreate that very same situation right here in practice if you have the luxury of a goalie and you have the luxury of enough players. At some point, those red players may change with blue number 4, or you could have blue number 7 and blue number 10, the right winger and the right attacking midfielder, be substitutes to replace blue number 11 and blue number 8. And why would they replace them? Because then they are again blue number 10 and blue number 7 are players that will communicate with each other more frequently. And as they communicate more frequently, they will pick up on each other's body language a little bit, maybe at an unconscious level, but it will happen. When blue number 7 goes, then blue number 10 goes. Because when blue 7 has gone the 10, 15, 30 times in practice and pressed, blue number 10 has also unconsciously gone. And so you're looking, again, to enhance the communication non-verbally as much as possible, even in practice. They communicate more frequently, so setting up that 4 against 2, it would look similar to this, maybe not in the same areas of the field that it looks like here, right? But again, in theory, in general, the idea is that they could play it into blue number 9 if they win it, and if you have a goalie at practice, and recreate it there. And you follow the same path as you make fields bigger or add players to it. Who are the players that will communicate in the press as you add 3 and 4 and 5 defenders out there? Taking just the forwards, the 9, the 11, and the 7, and they are pressing in the same way, as identical as possible in this training exercise, in this position game, as they would when they get on the field on Saturday or Sunday. From the red team's standpoint, why are these 3 goals out here? Because once the red team is able to get past or break the pressure of the blue team, you unconsciously influence their behavior as well, because this goal may recreate the right winger. This goal may recreate the left winger, because when the ball at some point comes into red number 3, who do you want him to look to pass to? Either the left winger or potentially the striker. And that's why those goals are put in there. If you have a different playing style or if you have a different formation, the positioning of those goals may change. So the positioning of the goals is dependent on the playing style of the coach. And what decision the coach makes in terms of a playing style is completely up to the coach. There is no wrong answer with that. That is dependent on the knowledge that the coach possesses and the players available to the coach. So 6 versus 3, the overall idea of the training session of this position game is to recreate as identical as possible the same patterns or the same actions that those players, the 9, the 11, and the 7 will make in a game. Adding more players to it, the game begins to look like this. 8 attacking players, counting the goalkeeper, 6 defending players. You could have 7. It all depends on the numbers available at practice. But the actions those blue triangles will make are identical to the actions that they're going to be required to make on the game, in the game. The patterns that they will need to recognize, that you as a coach will recognize, the same patterns that they will need to recognize in the game on Saturday or Sunday. At 5 versus 7.
As a reminder, if everybody could mute themselves, that'd be great.
It could look like this. So the overall question, again, the overall question is, what is the purpose of your training session? And that overall purpose is to recreate as identical as possible the same actions that they will perform in the game on Saturday or Sunday. And this, going back to this slide quickly, this slide, and this is just one of them, this slide is what is used. It performs the reference for the coach on what those positioning games, those simplification games look like. The coach needs not just this slide in his head, but he needs a picture when we're talking about defending, when we're talking about disturbing the buildup with a horizontal press. The coach needs a picture in his brain when the ball is at red 4, red 2, red 5, red 3, red 6, and that picture is the reference in the coach's head. So when he or she observes it on the field, this is the reference that's triggered in their unconscious brain, and that is what they use, that reference, to observe and evaluate their players, to answer the question for the coach, are my players doing what I want them to do? Again, the players are not robots. Blue number 7 may come in diagonally forward. He or she may come in horizontally straight across, or he or she may come in diagonally backward toward his or her own goal. All of that is dependent on the information that blue 7 collects as he or she is moving across the field. The question that blue 7 will never ask himself is, should I come in? You're coming in when the ball's on the other side of the field. That's the decision of the coach. That's the playing style of the team. Come in. How blue 7 comes in, up to blue 7. What you are doing then is, in these games, you are providing blue 7 identical patterns to recognize as what he or she will encounter in the game. So now when blue 7 may not come in, or should have come in horizontally, and they decided to come in diagonally forward or diagonally backward, you can provide some information to blue 7 on, as that ball's on the other side of the field, These are the things you want to observe to help you make the best choice possible, Blue 7. That's what you do as a coach. You provide them information, top-down guidance on what they can observe. Then players are responsible for observing it. But in games like this is what will help Blue 7 better understand the information they need to collect versus Blue 7 being this player, or Blue 7 being this player, or Blue 7 being this player. Yes, could Blue 7 be B2 in a keep away game? Yes, that would be fine. But what is happening is Blue 7 is seeing and observing things that will not be the same to Blue 7 on the field. Training Blue 7 in this keep away game, or 4v2 plus 1 game, or 6v3 plus 3 game for 15, 20, 30 minutes of a practice will not provide Blue 7 as much information as if you played this with Blue 7 for 20, 25, 30 minutes in practice. Performing the actions in this game, Blue 7 is able to become a better pattern recognizer in this game than in that keep away game or the 4v2 plus 1 game. So the challenge for us as coaches going forward is asking ourselves the question, what is the theoretical purpose of a session? That purpose is to improve football or soccer actions. And those actions, first as a coach, you want to make sure you know what they are for your team. And then you recreate simplifications of what those pictures are from 11 versus 11 to 6 versus 8 to 7 versus 8 to 8 versus 8. Whatever numbers you feel are best, you recreate those patterns or those situations in the games that those players participate in. That is the overall purpose of a training session. So that pretty much sums up the presentation for tonight. What Jeff and I have done throughout these presentations is we have asked, and you can email both of us, as you reflect on the presentation, maybe you watch it again, maybe you read over your notes, maybe you're just thinking about it tomorrow throughout the day or at some point during the day. Those reflections you have to email to us, because it allows you to further reflect on them, and it allows Jeff and I to further reflect on your reflections. Maybe it's something we could have done different. Maybe it's something we could have tweaked. Maybe it's something we should continue doing, because those reflections you have, allowing us to read them, give us some better insight into how best to do things into the future as well. So
I'm sorry, Mike. I was just going to say that's great information. A couple of things that stood out to me as you went through the presentation. The word purpose jumps out at me, and it's huge. And I think, and again, for somebody who's coached for a long time, I never really gave, up until the last handful of years, my activities this kind of thought. And in order to do that, to create these references for these players, it takes some planning from coaches. And it's not like we can walk out to the field and see that, hey, we've got, 10 players here, we're going to play 6v4 or whatever, without that purpose, without those specific references for the players. So I guess to kind of sum it up, I mean, what I'm taking away is we as coaches have to put some thought into what we're doing before we walk out on the field and make it very specific. So we're just not trying to shoot fish in a barrel. We know what we want from our players, and we have to design our activities to give them opportunities to get to those specific actions. Is that safe in summarizing that way?
That's a good summary. The piece, as coaches listen to what you just said, the misconception may be, again, that, well, we're just creating robot players. We're just taking all those thoughts from your head, and now they must just go out and do all those thoughts. Well, to a degree, that is what's happening. But the bigger piece is, again, go back to what you want players to do versus how you want them to do it. Coaches are responsible for the what. Players are responsible for the how. When coaches, and coaches may have used this phrase, but I'm sure they've certainly heard it, they describe a player as a creative player, as a tactically strong player. Oh, that player is really tactically strong. Or, boy, that player is really creative. Well, those are general, non-contextual phrases that really don't hold a whole lot of value if you hear them, because those phrases explain, or they are interpretations, your interpretations of something you observed. What is really happening is that player has very, very good game insight. That player makes really, really good decisions based on the information around him. That player has references triggered in his brain, and he, more consistently than not, chooses the best reference. And then once that reference is chosen in his brain, then he just executes it. So tactically strong players, all right, tactics has two meanings. It shouldn't have two meanings, but we use it using two meanings. We think of tactics at team level, and then coaches say tactics are at an individual level. It's impossible to be both. It's either one or the other. Tactics are at the highest point, team level, tactical agreements. Below that is game insight, individual game insight. Tactically strong players, creative players are just ones that have very, very good game insight.
Yeah, so they've had more references downloaded for them. They've had more exposure to these moments throughout a game and can make those decisions better and quicker than others, less experienced players. That's what that comes down to. We had a question pop in relation to this approach. How does this fit in when you talk? We hear a lot about player-centered approach, a player-centered environment. Mike, how would you make the connection between this approach and this being a player-centered approach to training players?
Well, if you think about what do most players want to do at practice? If you went up and asked a player, okay, we're going to go and we're going to run around the field for your warm-up, or we're going to go and we're going to play soccer for your warm-up. Most players would say, I'd like to play soccer. So these players are playing. There is always something you see. And again, you ask yourself as coaches this question. The majority of coaches go out there at the beginning of a practice or even a game, and they perform, or have the players perform, some dynamic warm-up. And that warm-up may be over a 10, 12, 15-minute period. And they're doing different types of running, forwards, backwards, some karaoke running, lunging, changing direction. And they're performing all those movements basically in isolation of whatever they're doing. And most players don't even do that at 100%. So if you think about player-centered, you could do that, or you could go into some type of 4 versus 2 game where all of those players are performing, maybe not identical, but as identical as possible, the same type of actions they're doing in that dynamic warm-up. They're lunging, they're shifting body weight, they're accelerating, they're stopping, they're rotating. They're doing all those actions, but what's the difference? They're doing them within a soccer context, which is what you want because you're a soccer coach and you're coaching soccer players. So that player-centered piece is, as you think about it, and this word is used quite a bit, this holistic approach, you're incorporating all of those things. You're incorporating the communication, you're incorporating the decision-making, and you're incorporating the execution of a decision. If you don't incorporate those 3 things, you're coaching something that looks a lot like soccer, but by definition is not soccer.
Gotcha. Thanks, Mike, for making that connection for us. Let me just see if we've got any other questions that have come in. Looks like they're so just a follow up. And I don't know, Mike, exercise physiology. I'm not sure if this falls into your realm, but that dynamic warm up that you mentioned, is that something that you would or would rather not do with your players? Is there a purpose for that in this approach?
Well, and ask yourself as a coach too, because if as a coach, we said you want to think about ways to download these references in their brain. And so as they're in it, and think about what was just said, ways to download references in their brain. So within that warm up, you not only, because what's the purpose of a warm up? To get their body ready to go play the game. Right? The one piece that dynamic warm ups don't do anything about is warming up their brain. They don't think about anything, players. Most players, and just picture those dynamic warm-ups in your brain, or picture any warm-up that you do in your brain. Most players, if it's not in a context of soccer, they're joking around, they're messing about, they're telling jokes from maybe what happened to them at school or happened to them in the car ride on the way to practice. And most of them are doing it in a very casual way. So it's not whether dynamic warm-ups are right or wrong, but knowing that coaches do not have enough time with their players, or as much time as they would like, what is the way to warm up not only their body, but their brain in a soccer context is to put them in soccer environments. And so if you want to do dynamic warm-ups, that's fine. It's every coach's choice, but you are not being as efficient as possible in maximizing what little time we have to give them the benefit of recognizing these patterns as much as possible, or as frequently as possible.
So what I'm hearing you say is we can accomplish those same things that they get out of dynamic warm-ups in some game that more closely resembles what is going to allow them to have some work on some of the soccer actions that we're expecting from our players.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Thanks for that clarification. We have reached our time limit, and I want to thank you, Mike, for the presentation, and thank everybody that jumped on for this. As I mentioned, we will have this posted on the Missouri Youth Soccer website within the next 24 hours. Feel free to share it, download it. It looks like we've got another opportunity for coaches that just popped up. Mike?
And I will I'll just say something about this quickly, and this is unrelated to Missouri Youth Soccer, but building off of this presentation, because this is these are all things that coaches should be doing, right? But it's in the brain of the coach. And now, how do we communicate as a coach to help download that information as we're doing passing exercises or position games? How do we download that information into the brains of our players, communication-wise, explicit learning-wise? That will be the context of the presentation on May the 6th. The big difference, again, this is a coaching association that I'm affiliated with, so there is a cost to it. So it's not free. And I don't want to make it as though it's through Missouri Youth Soccer to confuse anyone. So if you would like to do it, feel free and email me at that below email, and that will be kind of give you a little bit of a context for what it will look like on May the 6th.
That's great, Mike. Thanks. And with Missouri Youth Soccer, we don't ever mind promoting opportunities for coaches to learn and grow. We're fortunate enough to have the platform to do this once a week for our coaches that are members of our association. So I will tell you, I've sat in on these courses. They are excellent. And if you get a chance and you want to continue to grow as a coach and get new information, this is one opportunity. For me, being, one of my buckets is coaching education for the state. And I will tell you that I think we all need to be lifelong learners. If we want to deliver for players and be the best that we can be, we need to continue to educate ourselves and give ourselves opportunities to learn. So I just echo that opportunity, and thank you, Mike, for that opportunity. So I will end it there. I've got one more webinar to do tonight, and we will be back next week. Please watch for emails. And again, thank you. Stay safe and healthy, and hopefully we'll see everyone out on the field soon.
Thank you, guys.
Again, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome. Thanks.